from the now infamous navigational blunder by Bystrom, the guy who, with unwavering confidence, led a whole peloton of professional cyclists straight into the confined chaos of a parking lot. What a spectacular miscalculation! It was a domino effect of blind trust, as the entire pack, seemingly on autopilot, followed him right into the dead-end trap. And as if that literal wrong turn wasn't enough, the peloton's collective sanity seemed to short-circuit entirely. Just look at those two riders who decided to settle their differences with a spontaneous bout of fisticuffs, transforming a high-stakes race into a full-blown flight club on wheels. It's as if the discipline and strategy of professional cycling have completely derailed, both in terms of geography and mental fortitude. Don't get me wrong, I love the grit and glory of cycling as much as anyone. The sport is a beautiful ballet of endurance and tactics. But watching these scenes unfold, you just have to throw your hands up and ask, what in the world is going on out there? Because at that moment, it ceases to be a race for the finish line and morphs into a high-speed, lycra-clad competition for the most spectacular, self-inflicted disaster. If you ever need to define the glorious, unscripted chaos that cycling can produce, look no further than this. It is, without a doubt, the sport's wildest moment. Chris Froome, the champion cyclist, was on a relentless mission to defend his Tour de France title, and he was executing his plan to perfection. But halfway up the legendary moon-like ascent of Mount Ventoux, a mountain battered by howling winds, the script was torn to pieces.
The commentary from that day says it all. He's running. He's actually running to the finish. But where's his bike? It was a sentence that defied belief, yet there it was, unfolding in real time. Chris Froome, one of the greatest stage racers of all time, was about to finish a crucial mountain stage on foot. So what bizarre chain of events led to this surreal tableau? The culprit was a brutal combination of nature and human error. Fearing the region's notoriously strong winds could topple riders, the organizers had made a last-minute decision to truncate the stage, moving the finish line further down the mountain. Crucially, they failed to communicate this change effectively to the massive, fever-pitched crowd. The result was a bottleneck of apocalyptic proportions. Spectators packed the narrow road so densely that even the camera motorbikes, which usually carve a path, were gridlocked. When one of these motorbikes slammed on the brakes, Froome and his rivals, riding at full intensity, had nowhere to go. They piled into the machine in a horrific, slow-motion crash. In the ensuing chaos, Froome's bike was snapped, rendered useless. With the clock ticking and his yellow jersey on the line, instinct took over. He scrambled to his feet and began a desperate, ungainly sprint up the final gradients of the Ventoux, still clad in his rigid carbon-soled cycling shoes. It was a scene of sheer, improbable desperation, a moment forever etched into the history books, proving that in cycling, the line between triumph and farce is sometimes as thin as a tire. Peter Sagan, a man whose panache is as powerful as his pedal stroke, actually had his bike this time, yet he still ended up in a heap on the cobblestones. The scene was the Tour of Flanders, one of cycling's most hallowed monuments. After crushing a brutal sprint against his rivals, the three-time world champion, with the finish line literally in sight, decided to add an exclamation mark of pure Sagan flair by attempting to cross the line in a triumphant wheelie. It was a moment of supreme confidence. But in the split second between glory and gravity, physics intervened. The front wheel came up, the balance shifted just a fraction too far, and the reigning king of cool came tumbling down in a cloud of dust and disappointment. Yet true to his character, even his failures are a spectacle. He didn't just fall, he collapsed with a theatrical roll, popping up almost immediately with a wry, self-deprecating grin that seemed to say, "Well, that was fun, wasn't it?" It was a perfect reminder that it's better to fail with unforgettable style than to play it safe. And that very ethos, the thin line between a legendary celebration and a premature pratfall, brings us neatly to our next and equally spectacular miscalculation. The oldest race in cycling, Liège-Bastogne-Liège, is a 257-kilometer odyssey of pure, unadulterated pain through the Ardennes. On this day, the flamboyant Julian Alaphilippe, France's racing prodigy, had weathered every attack. As the finish line in Ons loomed, he was perfectly positioned in a select group of 4, looking poised to seal a monumental victory. In the final, lung-searing sprint, with the line mere meters away, Alaphilippe made a catastrophic miscalculation born of exhausted elation. Convinced he had done enough, he sat up, straightened his back, and threw his arms wide in premature triumph.
But in that fleeting, arrogant second, Primož Roglič, a man forged in the fires of relentless suffering, kept his head down and thrust his bike forward. He sliced across the line first, by a margin of mere millimeters, a difference invisible to the naked eye, but forever etched in the record books. The humiliation was twofold. Not only had Alaphilippe snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, but in his celebratory drift, he had veered dangerously across the road, nearly sideswiping 2 other contenders. The race jury's verdict was swift and merciless. He was relegated for his dangerous maneuver. In the span of 5 devastating seconds, he went from celebrating a certain win to being officially ranked 5th. It was a masterclass in how a single moment of lost focus can unravel 260 kilometers of perfection, a double fail of the highest and most public order. Of all the ways to lose a world championship, this was perhaps the most soul-crushing. Adam Topalik, in the rainbow stripes of the Czech Republic, was not just winning. He had broken the field. With the roar of the crowd washing over him, he launched a searing sprint that no one could answer. Convinced he had done it, he sat up, a cry of victory on his lips, and raised his arm to the heavens, saluting his imminent coronation as world champion. But the roar of the crowd wasn't one of adulation. It was one of horror and disbelief. In that single stomach-dropping instant, the truth dawned. The bell signaling the final lap hadn't rung. The finish line he had just celebrated was a mirage. The real one was still an entire agonizing 4.3 kilometers away. The energy of his winning sprint evaporated, replaced by the leaden weight of catastrophic error. His rivals, who had witnessed his celebration with shock, now swept past him as he faltered, his body and spirit broken. He would eventually cross the actual finish line in second place. There was no crash to blame, no mechanical failure, no external bad luck, just one colossal, unforgiving lapse in concentration. The gold medal was lost not in a sprint, but in a moment of devastating self-inflicted assumption. Every cyclist is drilled with one fundamental, almost sacred rule: save energy, trust the pack, and follow the wheels in front of you. It's a strategy that sounds simple in theory, but it becomes a recipe for pure pandemonium when the rider at the very front of the peloton has a catastrophic navigational failure.
Such was the scene on the final stage of the Tour of Alberta. Sven-Erik Byström, a respected professional, was on the front, setting the pace. Then, in a blink, he missed a critical turn. What happened next was a surreal spectacle of blind obedience. More than 40 riders, their heads down and brains switched into autopilot, followed his rear wheel without question, swerving en masse straight off the racecourse and into the confined, dead-end asphalt of a public parking lot. The result was instant, glorious chaos. The air filled with the screech of brakes and the shouts of bewildered champions who suddenly found themselves surrounded by parked cars and curbs instead of open road. The race was so thoroughly derailed that officials had no choice but to hit the reset button, neutralizing the event and ordering a full restart from the point of the wrong turn. It was a masterclass in collective confusion, a moment where the peloton's greatest strength, its hive mind, became its most hilarious weakness. It was, quite literally, confusion on wheels.
The opening stage of the Volta al Algarve was scripted to be a simple, straightforward affair, a flat procession under serene Portuguese skies, a day for the sprinters to limber up without a hint of drama. But with just 3 kilometers separating the peloton from a routine bunch sprint, the script was ripped to shreds. At a critical roundabout, a momentary lapse at the front of the pack saw dozens of riders, their focus already locked on the finish line, blindly follow a lead motorbike down the wrong exit. The peloton was violently cleaved into. One half, led by a handful of alert riders, continued powering toward the actual finish line. The other, a massive group containing contenders and domestiques alike, found themselves in a full-blown panic sprint in the exact opposite direction, their race numbers flapping in the wind of their own absurdity. The chaos was so profound, the competition so compromised, that race organizers were left with no credible choice. In a virtually unprecedented move, they simply erased the results, canceling the entire stage. It was a farce of such magnitude you truly couldn't make it up. Some spectators will go to unimaginable lengths for a fleeting moment of television glory. During a high-speed descent at the Tour de France, one fan, desperate to send a message to her grandparents, Opi is German for grandpa and grandma, lunged from the sidelines. With her back to the oncoming peloton, she thrust a massive cardboard sign reading "Ale Opi" directly into the road. The result was as instantaneous as it was catastrophic. The sign hooked the handlebar of Tony Martin, a powerhouse and former world champion, riding at the very front of the pack. He had no chance. His crash was the first domino in a horrifying chain reaction, a tangle of carbon fiber and bodies that swept up almost half the field in one of the most massive pileups in the Tour's long and storied history. It was all for a 2-second shout-out. The woman indeed got her 2 minutes of fame, swiftly followed by a lasting consequence, a staggering $35,000 fine from French authorities. The unwritten rule of the breakaway is simple. You set aside team rivalries and work in a temporary, peaceful alliance against the peloton. But that fragile truce shattered spectacularly between Gianluca Brambilla and Ivan Rovni. A dispute, likely over one not pulling their fair share, erupted from sharp words into a shocking exchange of wild, swinging punches, all while they were still hurtling down the road at over 40 kilometers per hour. It was a terrifying display of raw temper, a bare-knuckle brawl staged on 2 wheels. Race officials had zero tolerance for the dangerous spectacle. The verdict was swift and decisive. They were both summarily disqualified from the race on the spot. They turned a potential stage win into an instant dismissal. One can only conclude that if professional cycling ever decides to add a boxing event to its roster, these two have already earned themselves a lifetime ban. On the steep, narrow slopes of Mont Cassel, every single point in the King of the Mountains competition is a precious commodity. So when Benjamin Thomas and Matteo Verscher found themselves neck and neck, sprinting for a single, solitary mountain point, the stakes felt impossibly high. In their desperate handlebar-to-handlebar struggle, their wheels touched. The contact was minimal, but at that intensity, it was enough. And there you have it, the glorious 2-wheeled circus in all its chaotic, hilarious, and utterly ridiculous splendor. From navigational nightmares to mid-race fistfights and celebrations gone horribly wrong. This is cycling with its hair down and its helmet strap undone. But if you thought this was a parade of disasters, just wait for the next list. We're diving into the archives to chronicle the worst cyclists of all time. We're talking about the genuinely reckless, the blissfully clueless, and the cursed souls who are downright unlucky. These are the riders whose very presence on a bike makes you question team selection, physics, and sometimes the very fabric of reality itself.
Thomas crashed hard, his body scything into Virtue and taking them both down in a brutal, twisting heap of limbs and metal. Bikes were sent clattering across the asphalt.
As the dust settled and the absurdity of the situation dawned, Thomas's frustration boiled over. He scrambled to his feet, snatched his mangled bike, and hurled it into the barriers in a fit of pure, unbridled rage. It was a spectacular meltdown, a perfect storm of overblown drama, all for the glory of a single lonely point.